Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Princess Royal Centre for the Performing Arts. It's wonderful to have you here. My name is Shelaine Green. I'm Chair of Women in Public Life, and I'm going to be your host for this evening, which means I get the delightful task of telling you where the fire exits are. There are 4 green signs at the bottom of these stairs and the top of these stairs. And if you should have to leave, follow the instructions of the stewards. And the assembly point actually is not in the main car park. It's in the car park on the side, the gravel spare one. So that's where you need to go for that. I particularly want to give a warm welcome to all the students who are here from the Youth Forum and from the secondary schools. Really, really pleased to see you here. The future of our politics is in this room. Guernsey, we need to have a conversation about our politics. It doesn't have to be this way. We need ideas, we need solutions. We live in, as you know, extremely challenging times. Chronic housing shortage, cost of living crisis, COVID, Brexit, war in Ukraine, Moneyval, artificial intelligence. Now, more than ever, we need our deputies working together for the good of us all. But answer me this. When you listen to big states debates or read about them in the media, does it sound like a group of people who've explored the policy paper in depth and are now working together to come up with the best way forward for Guernsey? Or does it sound like people who are using every political angle they can think of to get a win for their team or for themselves? Yes, Guernsey, we need to have a conversation. But if you've come here this evening thinking that conversation is all going to be directed at politicians, think again. Our deputies are self-employed. They work for us, the voters. There's no board of directors that they report to. They set their own rules. We, the public, are the clients. If things are going off the rails, things aren't going off the rails, that's our responsibility. Rather than having one kind of lethal appraisal every 4 or 5 years, which we do at election time, you can stay, you can go, we need to be doing things between those times. It's not enough to just wait for election time. We, the voters, should be reviewing the health of our democracy on a regular basis. And if we want our politicians to do the best job possible, we, their employers, need to support them to do that. And if we don't like where things are headed, we need to do something now. Maybe we're worrying for nothing, and we'll all go home reassured this evening. But politics is polarizing and deteriorating around the world, and there's no reason why Guernsey would be immune. But there are 2 ways Guernsey is different to the rest of the world. Firstly, that increased polarization, tribalism, as our media calls it, is happening in a system that was not built for it. Guernsey's government is not an executive system with the balance of power bouncing between 2 different parties depending on the results of the election. In our system, there is no executive. Everyone is part of the government. Our system is based on committees and consensus. Independent deputies voting with a colleague in the morning, against that colleague in the afternoon, and then going to the pub for a drink afterwards. That fluidity has been lost over recent years. We're shifting into a more rigid winner-takes-all system, evidenced by predictable voting patterns and experienced politicians sitting on our backbenches. Guernsey's also different because we're small. Our politics is accessible. Our public gallery isn't up in the roof somewhere, it's right in the heart of the action. Our deputies are at the end of the phone. That's if you haven't bumped into them in the supermarket that week. Our media loves to report on examples of campaigning and people power. Ribbon, anyone? It's our democracy. If we want it to change, we can change it. It doesn't have to be this way. So why is Women in Public Life hosting this conversation this evening? Well, firstly, because we're an example of ordinary voters taking a positive step to improve democracy in the island. We are a small group of volunteers who believe in balanced representation, and we launched our group in 2020 to inspire and support the women of Guernsey to apply for all forms of public office. Tribunals, panels, committees, jurats, douaniers, and of course, deputies. The main reason we're hosting this, however, is our politics group. Since Women in Public Life launched, we've been looking at ways to nurture and develop women's interest in politics. It started with encouraging women to come and watch states meetings, and we just created a simple WhatsApp group to coordinate that. Because of work and caring commitments, only a limited number of people can physically come on a weekday, but many others were interested. So to keep them involved, those of us that were in the gallery started reporting out the speeches to the WhatsApp group and the votes. And in between states meetings, we began providing information on all the other ways you can interact with the states as a voter: consultations, scrutiny hearings, drop-ins. Then one day, Susie Gallion and Sarah Willis came to us with the idea of a Guernsey politics discussion group based on the principles of a book club. Our group members were already talking about the debates and asking questions online by this point, so moving to some of us meeting in person was a really logical step. Politics Group Live was born. The biggest reactions on our WhatsApp group come when the results of a big vote are announced in the States, like the anti-discrimination legislation going through, for example. But you can also guarantee that your phone will light up when there are examples of poor behavior in the States. Group members find it hard to understand why the people who are supposed to be leading the island do things that wouldn't be allowed in a normal workplace. Walking out en masse when particular deputies are speaking, mispronouncing colleagues' names, forgetting the basic rules of debate, ignoring the presiding officer, chattering to each other throughout the speeches, bickering on Twitter. These may seem minor, but collectively, they chip away at people's faith in our democratic system. For the group, there have been two major unsettling moments in this past year. The first was the resignation of Deputy Heidi Soulsby from Policy and Resources in October. For one of the most experienced people in the States, Vice President of our senior committee, to step away in frustration saying she wasn't being listened to was a huge shock. The second unsettling moment was the failure to reach agreement on our future tax system. Whether they were for or against the GST package, our politics group members were looking to our deputies to come together and agree a compromise so we could move forward. But in the end, all 5 options were rejected. Of course, there is a third unsettling period about to come. Having not raised taxes, the States is about to decide which projects we can no longer afford. These decisions will be huge and will reverberate for many years to come. Do we complete the Transforming Education programme? Do we build phase 2 of the hospital? Do we borrow? The debates in July and September could make the tax review look like a convivial walk in the park. Or maybe the situation is so challenging now that, like COVID, it will bring out the best in everyone. We can hope. So, inspired by our politics group, tonight we are holding up a mirror. We are examining our politics from the perspective of the voters who observe it, and we are searching together for positive solutions. After the interval, you'll hear from our expert panel, but we're going to start in the UK. What can we learn here in Guernsey from the cross-party work that fantastic organisations like Compassion in Politics are doing to bridge the divide in somewhere far more complicated, Parliament? I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for the evening now. Jennifer Nadel is an award-winning journalist. She's an author. She's the co-founder of Compassion in Politics, and she's also now the executive chair of the Global Compassion Coalition. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Nadel.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for that warm welcome, and a huge thank you to Women in Public Life for inviting me here. So, things can only get better. Well, the truth is they can also get worse. And that's really why I'm here, because we have a worse system in the UK, and I'm going to talk about what's happening there. Many of you will know in great detail what is happening there, but I'm going to talk to you about our work there, why it matters, and allow you to draw your own conclusions about whether or not you want to follow our route. So I'm going to start with just telling you a little bit about me, so you know why I'm here. So I've had various lives. I've been in and around Westminster for over 3 decades. I've been a reporter for ITV. I've been a barrister, hence the scales of justice there. I have run for Parliament a couple of times and sat on the National Executive of the Green Party, and I wrote a book with an actor called Gillian Anderson about how to achieve change in a way that's wholesome, that doesn't lead to conflict, aggression and division. So that's me. But unbeknownst to me, I am here today because of compassion. I didn't realise as a child growing up that my father had come to the UK on the Kinder Transport, which carried refugee children from Nazi Germany and Austria to Britain, where they were taken into homes. So I owe my life quite literally to compassion because of my father, and I know that that is an experience which is very present in your recent history here on the island as well, the role that compassion can play in extreme circumstances. So that is a thread that will run through. We know we need compassion in extreme circumstances, but why do we need compassion now? Well, refugees dying at sea, crossing the channel, boats not being rescued, but occupants being left to drown, those that do reach the shores of the UK, branded economic migrants, irrespective of whether or not they may have genuine asylum claims, and now, if the government has its way, to be deported to Rwanda without having their asylum claims checked. Hunger, homelessness, issues that in the UK have taken off at a really, really alarming level. Food poverty. 1 in 5 children in the UK now has food insecurity. Inequality has risen. Homelessness has risen. Division has risen. Food banks are now a way of life. These were unseen, certainly for the majority of my life, but now we've come to depend on them. They've become part of the infrastructure. It has become normalised that swathes of our population do not have enough money, whether that's because of inadequate benefits, whether that's because of illness, whether that's because of poor choices, whether that's because of poor wages. It doesn't really matter. We're one of the richest nations in the world still, and to have people going without adequate food or having to choose between food, heating, school uniforms is unacceptable. And then we have climate change, as if things weren't bad enough. We've got the war in Ukraine, we've got China's designs on Taiwan, and we have climate change. We have fires, we have agreements that have been made in Paris but are not enforceable or being kept to. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, which would solve poverty, climate change, lack of education, all in one go. We have 191 countries signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals, but no one is taking the actions that would lead to them being implemented. So we're great on talk, but we're really lacking on walk, and the consequences are quite terrifying. So who do we have to solve this problem? We have this man, and how in the UK do we attempt to solve these interlocking, incredibly complex issues? I just wanted to take a quick straw poll while I'm here. I can't really see you, the audience. I'll try and see you. I want to know whether, in your view, politics has become more tribal here. Hands up those who think it has become more tribal. Oh, okay. Let's see those who don't think it has become more tribal. I think that's one hand I see. Okay. That's a little bit. 1.5, 1.5. So abstentions. Anyone want to abstain? Okay, we've got a few abstentions, but we've got an overwhelming sense in the room that politics has got more tribal. We just saw an example of what happens when we have a tribal politics. Let's look at it in a bit more depth. So when we have a tribal system, the House of Commons, as you know, designed to be 2 swords lengths apart. The 2 green benches are 2 sword lengths apart, built on the idea of conflict, built on an adversarial system, on a binary system of winners or losers. Debates are either won or lost. They're not nuanced. People aren't carried from one side of the argument to the other. There's no room for new ideas. Bullying and abuse are rife. We have an absolutely shameful number of parliamentarians who are currently accused of sexual misconduct. We've seen the extent of bullying, report after report has shown, and of course that is then amplified on social media. We have a system where admitting mistakes is seen as a sign of weakness, and therefore honesty is jeopardized. If you can't admit you've made a mistake, if you can't say, well, you know what, we tried that, but it hasn't quite worked out, so we're going to try something else now. Can you imagine saying that on the Today programme, on television, in the chamber? You would be pulled apart. Party loyalty is prized above national interest. We have increasingly, since Brexit, seen some MPs who are willing to sacrifice their political careers and their hopes of advancement, some also who've had to leave their party. I'm thinking of Rory Stewart. But by and large, party whips exist to threaten. It's a legalised system of threats and bribes to make politicians toe the party line, irrespective of what they think is right, and sometimes irrespective of what their constituents want. This is the mother of all democracies. There are obstacles to equal engagement for women, but also for those with caring responsibilities. You know, in the UK, I know you have a more flexible system here, but in the UK, we're not allowed to job share. We're not allowed to have proper parental leave. We're not allowed to bring babies into the workplace. And so it's a very off-putting place. If we want to make it genuinely inclusive, that isn't happening. I know that you have a slight absence of women in your states. That's obviously an understatement. Eight women is not enough, if I can be so bold to say. You've got 20% of your government is women. Ours is 35%, but that's still not good enough. And we also have this winner-takes-all mentality. You know, we have, if only 51% of the population are listened to, we have another 49% that are not heard, that are not represented. And what happens as a result? People give up. Politicians, they're all liars, they're all in it for themselves, they don't really care. And then we see, looking, I've put Trump and Johnson there, then we see large swathes of populations who do not feel seen, who do not feel heard, who do not feel as if they've got a future, turning to extremes to the detriment of their own interests. So, thankfully, it really doesn't have to be this way. And I have to say that many of the things that we at Compassion in Politics work for are things that you have had, and have the potential to continue having. You know, Guernsey has the potential to be a world leader in terms of how it does politics. You can become the beacon that the rest of us follow. What are we doing in the UK? Well, I'm just going to say a bit about, I realise I haven't put anything about Compassion in Politics. We founded Compassion in Politics in 2018. The most common response we got when we founded it was, well, there's an oxymoron if ever I heard one. Nice idea. Why are you doing that then? But since we founded Compassion in Politics, we now have over 100 MPs actively engaged in the movement. We've been to speak at parliaments across the world, and there is a growing interest and appetite for compassion as a way of reforming the way we do politics. So I put an iceberg there for 2 reasons. One is that those issues that I highlighted, the way we behave in a conflictual, winner-takes-all party political system, hunger, refugees, climate change, all of it can feel like a hydra with all these different heads on it. but actually there is one underlying cause. And if we can address that one underlying cause of all those issues, that links all those issues, we will be able to make incredible headway. And how we identify that underlying cause is the absence of compassion. If there was more of a consensus around, if there was more of a demand for compassion, if there was more of a commitment to act with compassion, many of those problems would not exist or would be greatly reduced. There's a second reason why I put an iceberg here. It's because how we present as individuals is just the top of the iceberg. But all of us come with our own baggage, with our own history, with bits of ourselves that we're not even conscious of, with struggles that we may bring. And yet when we interact with each other, we only see the tip of that iceberg. And sometimes we come to believe that we are only the tip of that iceberg. So what is missing from the picture is psychological awareness of what is going on with us. We lash out at someone. Is it really that we're so angry about this thing that's happened in the moment? Or could it actually be aggravated by things that have happened in our past? We respond to someone's assertiveness as if it's aggression. We respond to aggression as if it's an assault. In all sorts of ways, if we're not aware of our own psychology, what we're bringing, we act it out on those around us. So what do we mean by compassion? The first is, the definition we use is from the Compassionate Mind Foundation, and an empathetic concern for the suffering of another is the first part. And the second is taking action to alleviate that suffering. So compassion isn't a feeling. It's not like niceness. It's not like kindness. It's not like poor you poor thing. It's not like pity. It's an action. And it's based on the fundamental equality of all of us as humans. If you are suffering, that matters to me. If you are on the other side of the world and you are suffering and I don't know you and I don't know your name, that is still a problem. That is not okay. And yet the way we live, we're often encouraged, and we live in a culture to focus on ourselves, on our own competitive advantage. How do we get by? How do we get enough? And what is enough? There's no limit on what is enough, as we can see in the way that wealth is accumulated and hoarded. So how do we move to a society where compassion becomes the dominant value? So in the UK, we founded Compassion in Politics, and we focus on two things. One is the process of politics. How do we do politics? If we don't do politics in a compassionate way, we're unlikely to arrive at compassionate outcomes. So some of our work is based with committees. We speak to the speaker, we do surveys, we do polling, we do all sorts of things. This is the reaction that we were able to facilitate after Johnson attacked a woman in the House of Commons for saying that she was frightened she would be attacked. I don't know if you remember, the woman said, "I'm frightened, Joe Cox has been killed. I'm worried about my safety and well-being," and Boris Johnson dismissed that as humbug. Everyone was very upset across the House, but no one knew how to respond to that. So we organised a Stop the Nastiness campaign. Everyone knows what nastiness is. This isn't rocket science. And within 3 days, we had over 100 MPs from across the House who'd signed up to it. Then from that, we arrived at a voluntary code of conduct. How we behave as individuals, irrespective of how other people behave, has a difference. This is our most recent one, which we did with the Joe Cox Foundation for the local elections that just happened in May. This is the sort of commitment that candidates can make. I'm going to set a respectful tone. I'm going to lead by example to foster constructive democratic debate. I'm not going to issue attacks. And I'm going to demonstrate compassion by defending and promoting the dignity of others. So we've run this in quite a few elections now, variations of this pledge, and we've done surveys to see what happens afterwards. And even if only one person in each constituency has taken the pledge, they report that the tenor of the debate has shifted. You can only have a tug of war if both people are pulling on the rope. If you can stay true to your own beliefs, to your own internal code of conduct, or to your own pledge, then you can alter the tenor of the debate. If you refuse to engage or return personal attacks and instead stick to the point, stick to the issues, that in turn creates a different environment within which politics can be conducted. And then we also have a problem with honesty. As I'm sure I don't need to go into the detail, there's a lovely quote here from Simon Sinek: "Trust is built on telling the truth, not telling people what they want to hear." We know why trust matters. Trust matters because without trust, things fall apart. We've got two bills in the House of Commons at the moment. One of them would make deception in politics the same as deception as deception is in business. You can't misrepresent a car when you're trying to sell a used car. You can't say it's a Rolls Royce if it's a Ford. We think the same should be true in politics. So we have those pieces of legislation in the House. Compassionate outcomes, focus on alleviating suffering. Politics is about choices. It's about what sort of a country do we want to live in? What kind of a world do we want to leave our children? So compassionate outcomes are about alleviating suffering, making sure that everyone is safe, protecting future generations, leading with integrity. So they're really human values, and most of us live with those values in our homes. You know, we don't throw out our granny because she ceased to be of economic benefit. We don't spend all our savings without thought for our children's future. And yet something happens when we go into politics and different principles start to apply. So in the UK, where we have this increasing drift away from democracy, this increasing belief that there isn't such a thing as democracy, we remind politicians, don't blame the public. It's not the public that have drifted from you. It is you that have drifted from the values that most of us live by. And Shelaine pointed to the power and the potency that we as voters have and citizens have. And one of them is to remind politicians what values we want to live by. So these are the values that compassionate politics brings, and they're really vital if we want to make the best choices and if we want to create the best world for ourselves and our future. An emphasis on cooperation and collaboration, which you have in the absence of a party system. Debate respectful and considerate, honesty, integrity rewarded. We don't want a party system with the dangers of whipping. Focus on solutions over attachment to an ideology. Inclusive, everyone feels heard. Rituals and processes reinforce ethos and remind participants of the purpose of politics. So one of the things we do when we work with parliamentarians is that we start each meeting with a moment's silence, and we ask politicians to remember the people that came before them and the people that will come after. In other words, their responsibility, just one chain in the long thread of humanity. We don't have to become someone who goes down in history. We just have to remember why we're here, and that we're here by the grace of those who came before us. We do a lot of polling. Voters actually want more compassionate politicians. They don't always vote for them, but when you ask them, they say that they want them. Honesty, incredibly important. We had, I think, nearly 80% of the public supporting the piece of legislation that we introduced into the floor of the House. A majority of voters want to make sure that everyone has enough to eat and survive adequately. And a majority of voters would like refugees to have more rights. But often we see politicians preempting what they think voters want, offering those policies, and that in turn amplifies a lack of compassion. So I just want to talk for a moment about compassion and society in general. We in the world have an epidemic of loneliness, and I know that you here have a problem as well. That this survey in 2018 found that 30% of under 50s suffered from intense social loneliness. That was before the pandemic. that doesn't just matter in terms of human suffering, it matters in terms of health outcomes. The biggest determinant of health is level of social connection. It's more effective than giving up smoking, it's more effective than losing weight, it's more effective than joining a gym and actually going to the gym. Social connection is the single biggest factor that can create a healthy population and a thriving population. It improves workplace culture, it improves productivity, it reduces health bills, it improves educational outcomes. There was one wonderful experiment done where anaesthetists in the control group, the anaesthetist didn't visit the patient before administering the anaesthetic. In the other group, they did. They just spent 3 minutes with the patient. Those patients who had had a moment of compassionate connection with their anaesthetist left hospital much earlier and needed far less anaesthetic to go under. It really creates a different culture and a different environment. And now I want to talk about why that matters, just not from the point of view of public health, public expenditure, all of our well-being. I was invited out to the Basque region in Spain to talk, and of course in the Basque region they have only had democracy since 1979. Within living memory they have had civil war. Almost everyone has a story, whether it's directly affected them, they know someone whose parent, uncle was either killed or injured in conflict. They know what happens when democracy is lost. They know firsthand how valuable the democracy, which so often we take for granted, is. The Yale historian Timothy Snyder wrote a fantastic book called On Tyranny. And in that book, he identifies compassionate connection as one of the main defenders against the rise of tyranny. And they know this to be true in the Basque region of Parliament. And they have created a network of compassionate communities. And when I went to visit there, I overheard a conversation between one of these compassion connectors with the speaker, which is who I'm meeting there. And he said, we had a meeting the other day and we've identified 3 cases of loneliness, but it's all right, we're taking action. Can you imagine a society in which 3 cases of loneliness was seen as a quasi-emergency and action was taken? But that is what we're aiming for. We are aiming for a world where we are all connected, where all of us feel cared about, where all of us feel seen, and it's utterly possible. It's within our gift, it's within the choices that we make. Do we choose compassion, or do we choose an older, more binary system that most democracies across the world have inherited in some form or other, and which is causing huge division and huge suffering? So I'm here today hoping that what you have, this precious thing, a consensus-based parliament, will continue to thrive and that it will be protected from the vagaries of a more conflictual system. So things can get better. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you. Particularly thank you for showing that video of Lindsay Hoyle, the speaker. When you watch that video of Lindsay Hoyle, the speaker, you realise just how complicated Jennifer's job is and just what she's taking on with compassion in politics. So thank you very much, and all power to your elbow.
Thanks.
Now, I'm going to throw it open for a couple of questions for Jennifer now. Ideally, if you have questions that are focused on Jennifer's work in the UK or Jennifer herself, because if you have any questions that are specific to Guernsey, then please hold those for the second half, because that's when we're really going to be talking about the Guernsey situation. Please say your name before your question. We have roving mics. And does anybody have anything they want to ask Jennifer about compassion in politics? Here, please. Just wait for the microphone a second.
Hello, Charlotte Dunstable. Very interesting talk, thank you. I just wondered if you thought there were any more model governments, maybe in Scandinavia, where there's more female representation and there is more compassion? So you talked about the UK, but are there any other models that we could aspire to?
Yes, well, there are some great examples, particularly of places where there are strong female leaders. We look at New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, her response to that terrible act of terrorism, and look at the two parliaments that Westminster has birthed. It's birthed Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly. Neither of them have first past the post voting systems. Neither of them have opposing rows of green benches. So we know the way we do things isn't really fit for purpose. And when we create new parliamentary models, we do use the science that's there, but we perpetuate the one that we have. I have to say a word about whether just having more women is enough. When I was a journalist over 30 years ago, I wrote a piece and I did a piece for Women's Hour on what was then called chauvinism in the House of Commons. And the sort of things that people were talking about were being patted on the bottom or having inappropriate proposals made to them. Now, more than 30 years later, we have abuse, we have rape in the House of Commons, we have death threats, we have rape threats, we have attacks on constituency officers, we have the death of MPs. So it is not enough simply to put more women into a system that is not functional. We have to look at how the system itself functions. We have to look at what behaviours it rewards. Does it exacerbate conflict? Does it exacerbate aggression? Or does it soothe things and enable people to give expression to their better selves? You know, one of the ways of looking at it is that our politics at the moment is triggered, which means that most people in the political space in the UK are operating in a fight or flight psychological state. And when you're in that fight or flight state, you're operating from the Neanderthal part of your brain, and you can't actually think in a nuanced way. So what we need to do is soothe the political environment, de-escalate conflict, and create a system where it's safe for people to say what they think, to admit to not knowing, to admit to not being sure, and to change their minds. And obviously those are qualities that women who, I don't want to generalise, but generally we are slightly better at managing those behaviours. But if we have a system in which they're penalised rather than rewarded, it doesn't matter how many women we pour in, we're still going to have problems.
Thank you. Any other questions for Jennifer? Lady up there in the white t-shirt.
I echo, excellent, really enjoyable, thank you very much. One of the points that you made when you were talking about the change that we're looking for, how can we get turkeys even to vote for Christmas? And when, as you said, voters may want compassion, but they don't vote necessarily for compassion. So other than the pledge, what more can we do to get change?
Well, first of all, we have to try and change the climate, because the moment people are frightened, and of course what Trump and Johnson have in parallel is creating a climate of fear. And when people are frightened, they are always going to choose the more conservative, restrictive option. There was a wonderful study done in the States. This was pre-pandemic, when hand sanitizer wasn't a big issue. They gave one half of the group no hand sanitizer. The other half of the group were allowed to use hand sanitizer. Then they asked both groups questions about immigration. The group that had used the hand sanitizer gave more generous responses to the question about migration. That tiny amount of increased sense of safety can elicit a much more compassionate response. Similarly, we know that when people have had compassion training, it reduces out-group conflict. So what can we do? We can act with compassion ourselves. We can create a culture where behaviours become unacceptable. We can call them out. We can say, not in my name, or that isn't quite how I see it. We can object. We can make it more desirable to be compassionate than not to be compassionate. And we all have agency in this. It's so easy to feel hopeless in the face of the multiplying crises that we face, but all of us have agency. We can all make choices, however small they may be. And once we're acting, we have a sense of hope, a sense of agency, a sense of purpose. And then collectively our energy rises and we can work together towards the sort of outcomes and the sort of country we want to see.
Brilliant. One last question, maybe from this side of the room. Anyone want to know anything else? Right at the back in the middle.
Hello, I'm Emily Watts, but I would like to say, how do you feel that this can be feasible on a reasonable timescale, and how do you think you can promote this to the voters in a way that we can fully understand how this movement's going to go forward, rather than promoting it to people that might not necessarily understand it in the future?
Okay, thank you.
Lovely question. Well, it can happen very quickly because most of us live by these values. It's just trying to get these values inserted into the public space. So all of us can ask a politician when they give an uncompassionate response, where's the compassion? I'd like a more compassionate solution to this problem. Have you seen that there's suffering here? So all of us can start, one person at a time, to start spotting the need for compassion and to frame it as compassion. You know, not about a war of ideologies or a tug of war between one party manifesto and another, but this is about compassion. This is about who we are as humans. This is about ensuring that we are all okay. And this is what we want to see our politics do. And particularly for your generation, because we are leaving you with one hell of a mess. And one of the legislative changes that we're campaigning for in the UK is a Future Generations Act, so that parliamentarians now are obliged to consider what the impact of the decisions they make will be on the next generation. And we can do, there are some really, sorry, I'm going to try not to go on because I can see Shalaine's got her look. But we can have assemblies.
You should see me in Politics Group Live.
You know, there are two, I know, really tough issues that you're dealing with here. Why not involve everyone in the decision making? Why not have citizens' assemblies where everyone comes into the space and can really be educated and take the decisions collectively? Why put it all on a few politicians? There are other ways of making decisions that are far more inclusive and far more democratic. So start calling for those, educate yourselves, write letters, write emails, text, speak, phone, demand it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jennifer. I'm going to close the questions there now. So we're going to go to interval. We're going to take a 15-minute break. Please do have a drink in the bar. After the interval, our expert panel will be here. They'll be giving their views on the future of Guernsey politics, and they'll be listening to your questions and hopefully listening to your ideas as well. So please do join us after the break. Thank you very much. See you in 15. Hi, everyone. Hello, welcome back. I'd like to introduce our expert panel, first of all, and I'm going to start with Perrin Carey. Perrin is a governance specialist, governance meaning the way that a business or a government would make decisions. His company, CoSteer, they work in the Channel Islands and across other countries too, and what they do is they help companies measure and understand the way their governance and business culture works. Now, what they do is they use proprietary technology, and what is it you call it? Human data, Perrin?
Well, yes, human governance. Yeah.
Human governance, there you go. And the reason we've asked him to join the panel is because we'd really like to understand how initiatives to improve a culture in a business could be applied to politics. Next to Perrin is the Deputy Heidi Soulsby. She's in her third term in the States. In her first two elections, she was elected top of the polls in her district. And when we had our first island-wide election, she came second overall, and Deputy Dudley Owen came third. Now, in her first term, she led the Public Accounts Committee. In her second term, she was President of Health and Social Care and was awarded an MBE for her services in the COVID pandemic. This term, she was Vice President of our most senior committee, Policy and Resources, leading on the government work plan and several other really important initiatives until her resignation in October last year. And with me here is Deputy Andrea Dudley-Owen. Deputy Dudley-Owen is President of Education, Sports and Culture. And this is her second term in the States, isn't it? Yes, second term in the States. In her first term, she was a member of the Economic Development Committee, and there she was focused on digital innovation and entrepreneurship. That's it, digital information and entrepreneurship, and was also the chair of the Finance Sector Forum. Briefly, she was vice president, and then you were. Where did you go after that?
I was vice president of the Committee for Economic Development for 2 years, and then I think Carl will remember better than me a few weeks on education, sport and culture. I was vice president and resigned from that committee in 2018.
But the thing you might know her best for is that Deputy Dudley-Owen led the successful requête that paused and reviewed the two-school model. And she and her committee are now leading the Education Transformation Programme. Right, so we also have Jennifer back with us. Jennifer's going to give us an external perspective on Guernsey politics. So please welcome our panel. Now, the whole purpose of this evening is to gather ideas and solutions to help improve Guernsey politics from the panel and from all of you in the audience. And to help us create a list of those, we're going to turn this big board, if we possibly can, into a big whiteboard, because what we're going to try and do is list all of the ideas as they come up. And the idea is we will publish that list of all the ideas we've come up with on our website tomorrow, hopefully to inspire either an individual or a group to grab one of those ideas and run with it. Now, the focus of the discussion, there we go. The focus of the discussion, these are the ideas from Jennifer, and we're going to add other ideas as we go through. Our focus needs to be really, really positive. And I give you fair warning right now that if we start drifting into the territory of only if she hadn't tweeted that, or if he hadn't voted this way, I will intervene. Blame will get us nowhere in this particular discussion. We're looking for all those positive ideas and solutions. Now, when we do Politics Group Live, we always start off after introductions with allowing everybody around the table to just have a couple of minutes to set out their initial thoughts on the particular topic. And we're going to do exactly the same here. Not for Jennifer, because you've heard her thoughts before the interval, but for all our three other guests. They will have 3 minutes to set out their initial thoughts on it doesn't have to be this way, making the most of Guernsey politics. Where's Christine? Christine, can you wave at us? This is Christine here. She will let you know when your 3 minutes is up. And we're going to start with Deputy Salisbury.
Thank you. Now, it was Lord Montgomery of Alamein, not known as a shrinking violet, who once declared, "War is a very rough game, but I think politics is worse." Let's not kid ourselves here. Politics isn't easy. Everyone has an opinion, and if you raise your head above the parapet, expect someone to have a pop at you. We're dealing with issues that directly impact the lives of people, and it's understandable that there's passion. However, in recent years, beginning in the last term, things have changed and not in a good way. Look, I'm not saying everything used to be perfect, of course not. But what we're experiencing today, both in Guernsey and further afield, is something more insidious and damaging than anything experienced before. It's an attitude that has been allowed to take root in a way not previously seen. It is undermining our democratic system and ultimately means that those we represent and who we should have at the forefront of our minds are not being well served. For me, at the heart of the matter is the importance of trust and mutual respect. These values underpin our consensus system of government, believing that every member of the states has the best interests of the people at their heart, and that is what governs their actions, should not be questioned. However, just as Donald Trump shouted about draining the swamp, we have seen an us and them culture grow. Those politicians who don't support a view on a particular matter, or civil servants who don't give them the answer they want, are seen as the enemy. Compromise is seen as a weakness rather than a strength, and working with others across the political spectrum is treated with suspicion rather than what it is, the way to make progress. It manifests itself in poor behaviours, such as mass walkouts when some deputies are speaking, shouting in meetings, deliberately mispronouncing names, legal threats and playing the person, not the ball. This makes it sound like the system needs to change, be it how we vote on the machinery of government, I don't think that the change to Island-wide voting has helped, but it's not the cause.
Neither do I believe moving to an executive system of government will make things better. We have only to look at our big neighbour to the north to see that. My view is that it's only a small number of people who are the problem. The real issue is that they are being allowed to get away with it. And to tackle it requires leadership and on more than one front. Politically, yes, but also from the civil service, media, and ultimately the public, who need to be empowered. We need a complaint system separate to the blunt instrument that is a code of conduct. We need the highest levels of the civil service to speak truth unto power. And we need the media not only to call out bad behaviour, but highlight how consensus has made a difference, or indeed where it could have made a difference. And last but not least, we need the public more directly in the decision-making process, such as through citizens' assemblies, to bring consensus to the fore once again. Challenge is needed so we can replace the politics of fear and distrust with the politics of hope, and yes, compassion, because we need it now more than ever.
Thank you, Nadel. Karen, why don't you go next?
Thank you, Shelaine. I can't see you, but you can hopefully see me. Think to yourself and think if you can raise your hands if you have recently given way to someone at a filter and turn. Thank you. Put your hands down. Raise your hands again if in the last year you've bought and not stolen from a hedge veg. Okay. Culture. There's a wonderful quote from Seth Godin who describes culture like this. He simply says, people like us do things like this. Which obviously begs two questions. Who are we? And what do we do? I think you've just shown me what the expectation is from you on us. And I include myself because I'm one of you. Culture is what emerges and shifts and changes in all groups of humans. And there are various aspects that influence culture. Diversity, inclusion, equity. These three things are probably the most influential factors on the culture that emerges in all groups. Your expectation, I would imagine, from your show of hands, is that you expect to trust your politicians and the decisions that they make, and that they will behave in a way that's respectful towards themselves, each other, and you. So something isn't quite happening as you would expect. I touched on diversity and inclusion. There is a difference. Diversity is the breadth and depth of the people that you might have in the room with you. Inclusion is allowing them all to speak, hearing them, seeing them, and embracing their opinions. I'm going to touch on one other aspect. Empathy or compassion. In our research, looking at the role of different attributes in the quality of the governance of a group of humans, whether that's a business or whether that's a government. Of the 27 elements that we measure, from the quality of data that's available for decisions, the quality of training that's delivered to the people, the quality of communication, the quality of the operations, one thing repeatedly stands out at the top of the most influential, and it's empathic leadership.
Thank you, Karen. I'm afraid that's your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Deputy W.
Well, thank you very much. Guernsey politics is unique. The Guernsey political system is unique. And I'd like to think that it's a pretty sophisticated type of democracy. albeit sometimes frustratingly slow. We tend to go round a few times before we get to the right solution for the island. And it can be frustrating for islanders to see that consensus in action. But one thing is really clear, is the best intentions of all the politicians, all the people that put themselves forward for public office, to try and work their hardest for the good of the island, take it forward in a constructive way, to think about future generations. And it's not easy. It's actually one of the hardest jobs because of the nature of our small community, the fact that we know so many people within the community and we're related to an awful lot of people. We've worked with a lot of people. We're affected by our own policies. You hear the conflicts of interest coming forward on a regular basis within the chamber when we're making decisions, certainly within committee, which are held in camera. So we have to recuse ourselves from those decisions. But one thing is missing now, and that is trust. That's trust amongst each other, and that's trust from the electorate towards their politicians. And that's not unusual. But I think what is happening in Guernsey politics is a change of expectation. The expectation that actually we need to be more professional about what we're doing and how we're approaching our work. And we're not keeping up with the expectation of our electorate. We often hear on social media, within media commentary, that it used to be better in the old days, when we had retired businessmen in the main who were making decisions on behalf of the island just in their spare time, because they felt so much more about the island than the current politicians do. But I don't believe that that was the case. I don't think that that we are any less well-intentioned than our predecessors before us. But what is clear is the amount of time that we have to spend nowadays looking at legislation and policy, the amount of evidence that we have to consider, the amount of information, and the complexity and the myriad of factors that we have to consider now that possibly didn't come across the desks of our predecessors. The professionalism that we demonstrate in the chamber is often learnt as opposed to learnt by following rote as opposed to learnt via training. And training is one thing that I have asked for many times in our system. The current States Assembly and Constitution Committee has put on more training than we've ever had before, but I think that that needs to increase. We have rough diamonds coming into our Assembly, and I think that we could do better by the people that put themselves forward for what is often a very arduous job.
I can only give you a few more seconds, I'm afraid.
Thank you. And I think that support, mentoring, I think a change of culture comes from a leadership of senior politicians, not just one person, remembering that we all have an equal vote in the Assembly and no executive leadership.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Deputy. There they are. Now that you've heard each other and you've heard Jennifer's talk before the interval, is there anything you wanted to pick up on from each other's speeches and anything that struck you? I was wondering, Jennifer, if anything that people are saying here in Guernsey chimes with what you're hearing in the UK, or whether we talk completely differently.
Well, I think there's a strong consensus here, and I was really interested in the point that you made about training, and that's one thing that should have been on my list. You know, we've put people in Parliament and just expect them to know how to do it. It's the most important job. And yet there is no training for it. What other profession would you give a surgeon a scalpel and say, right, go ahead?
No, you wouldn't.
We wouldn't, but we do give, I mean, with the induction process today, or certainly in the last election, was the most comprehensive you could imagine. I mean, it covered weeks of so-called training about all manner of what goes on in the States. And there's also one particular induction programme on the code of conduct and the Nolan principles. And that is something that I don't know whether they went through one ear and out the other for some members. But, the Nolan principles is what we're talking about here, aren't they? Selflessness, honesty, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, and leadership. And leadership is the absolute key to this, understanding that every member of the state is a leader. And that, because it's not just people at the top, we've all got to show leadership and to make people understand the importance of those principles and call them out when they don't actually follow them.
Let me ask you a question, and this training definitely sounds superior to the training that our new members receive. How do you want, the problem that we've found in the UK is that we have the Nolan principles, which everyone agrees with and applauds, but they're not enforceable. How do you enforce them here? Do you have a mechanism of enforceability?
Do you want to let Deputy Delione answer that one?
We have a code of conduct, but it's being reformed currently, and it hasn't been fit for purpose. Because we have no executive government. The code of conduct is the only way to performance manage, and it's not a good way to performance manage. I think that Heidi is absolutely right about the amount of training, but to have one session and then you're off on your merry way, that's not how it would be done within a corporate culture. What you would have the privilege of within a corporate culture is follow-up training. You'd have performance management processes, and you'd be having mentors. And the lack of supporting mentors in our system has really been visible. I think it was something that used to be in play, but we don't have it anymore. And I think that those individuals who have been leaders within our system it would really be well placed to take on a new politician under their wing, and to be able to allow them to develop and grow and to give them objective advice about that, because it is really missing at the moment. And there is the feeling that, well, I have one vote, therefore I'm as good as you. But that really isn't quite the case, because actually that individual who comes in off the street as a new politician hasn't had the benefit of understanding how politics works within Guernsey, understanding that we're not just local government, we're also on a global stage as well, and we may have to represent the island amongst some extremely high-powered politicians around the world. And that's, it's a bit of a steep learning curve, I think, for a lot of people.
Sorry, but Perrin, that reference to training must ring true from a business perspective. When you're helping businesses deal with their cultural issues, training must be a big part of that.
Yes, it is. And I think most people here who work for organisations will know that there's often training and development budgets, and you can apply for training and you can do that. I think what our research shows is that the nature of the training is often more important than the quantity of investment. So when thinking about the training that needs to be provided, I'm not diminishing the training that has been provided, but it's about thinking, is the training giving me sufficient skills to be able to carry out the roles that I have to carry out? Now, I would moot the idea that the principal role within your organisation is to be able to make consensual collective decisions. So it's an open question. Is there training on being able to make consensual collective decisions?
No, there has been, no.
And is it mentioned in the code of conduct?
No, it's around
Because
how
the
you should
Nolan
behave with people.
principles- The Nolan principles are very high level.
absolutely.
Honesty, integrity, all that kind of thing. They're not at the level of, as you say,
What it means in
explaining how
practice.
consensus-
Exactly, and where the rubber hits the road is where a lot of people start to skew slightly, because under pressure in the chamber, actually the chamber is a bit of a theatre, and we know that. You prepare quite for debates, especially if you're leading a policy letter, etc., and you've done a lot of work around that for quite a long time leading up to it. I think tensions are heightened, etc., and people do I think feel a level of sort of excitement, possibly, or fear or what have you, in performing in that space.
You make a really good point about the theatre that is the courtroom, and it's like Westminster, and your swords, and you've got to be it's a sword's throw away. I don't think it helps in this for the beginning of this state, where it was decided to have those in particular parties sat opposite each other. And I don't think that our assembly is right for our form of government. It's not even a parliamentary, it's not for parliament, it's a royal court, it's a courtroom.
But that
It's
decision
not
wasn't
ideal.
made by us as politicians,
and
it
it
was made
wasn't.
by our presiding officer.
It was, and I think it's started the rot. I think it caused that idea of division. I didn't like it when I saw it because you could see that would all it would do is lead to conflict, which is not what our system is about. So for me, I think we should have our own.
Changing the seating arrangements would help, which goes back to your point, Jennifer, about sometimes the small things make the difference.
It's so simple. If you think about a classroom where there is persistent trouble in behaviour, you would just break
You
up,
separate them.
not next to each other. It's really not rocket science.
Well, I would like to add, though, because there has been much made of people walking out of the assembly. I'm going to be a little bit basic here. We don't have toilets on our chairs, and I think that the need to go to have a comfort break. We've got 40 members within the Assembly, all of us varying ages, but probably towards the older side. There's a significant amount of people with hidden disabilities, actually, within our Assembly that aren't known about, and some of them really quite serious, actually. And I think that the expectation that people, I find it quite outstanding that some people are able to sit for the length of time that they are, but I'm certainly not. I had treatment for cancer in the last 18 months, and I need to get up and walk around on a regular basis, as do other people. It's a real shame, actually, because you do miss the opportunity to listen to people.
I think from our point of view in the gallery, we are used to the normal comings and
Yes.
goings. What we notice is the abnormal comings and goings.
I think that there was one particular occasion that people refer to often, I cannot account for why people leave the room, but I can guess it's pretty physical on a lot of occasions. But I do think that certainly in the last states, a lot of this is subjective. I heard bad language, I heard shouting, I saw a lot of crying, I saw a lot of adversarial goings on outside of the chamber and actually inside the chamber, which were witnessed by court staff, witnessed by media, by people coming into the chamber. And I think that there has always been a degree of, well, certainly in my experience last term was much worse than this term. I haven't seen people really losing their emotions overrunning to the extent that I did last term. So I think that it is subjective.
And we're definitely not saying this is just this state. This is an issue that's been building over time.
Yes, I think that's the point. It's been building. And as I said earlier, it's never been perfect. And there's always been those odd instances. There's always some type thing that just breaks people up. But here it's just seeing on a more regular, that the amount of time it's happening, it seems to be, it's just built up and up. And I think that's what we need to nip in the bud.
You've set the scene really well there. I'm going to start asking for questions right now. And as I said before the break, please say what your name is and please wait for the microphone. And we're talking about questions. We're talking about suggestions. If you've got a suggestion for how we could improve our politics, let's have that too, and we can put it up on our whiteboard. Do we have a question from a gentleman? Because I just want to, balanced representation and all that. Gentleman up there, very close to the microphone.
Hello, my name's Vince Tyson. This is a really
Hi,
good
Vince.
event. Thank you very much. We've heard a lot about the people in the chamber.
Yeah.
But they're put there by a public, and I'm probably not the only person who suspects people are also voting for these behaviours, it seems. There is a certain amount of that going on.
People are voting for these behaviours.
For these behaviours,
Okay.
for disruption, and we've seen that here, we've seen that further afield. And I just wondered if the panel feel any of the ideas we're talking about here could also be applied and used helpfully in the public to maybe bring people in more, give people more of a understanding of why behaviours are disruptive and not just a bit of political argy-bargy, which people quite enjoy as entertainment, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Who'd like to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely, because I wrote down what Jennifer said, that people want more compassionate politicians, but voters don't vote for compassionate politicians. And that, I think, speaks a little bit to what you were saying about what people actually really end up voting for and what they'd like. And I think that certainly, I know that all of us would be receptive to bringing more members of the public into the chamber and talking on a one-to-one basis or in small groups. I think everyone's really, really keen in Guernsey politics to get out in the public domain and to share our experiences and to explain more about policies, how things work, because it is quite complicated actually, and it can take a good few years to learn the ropes and to understand. I think that the citizens' assemblies, I really do like those ideas to formalise that, and that has been an idea that's been bandied around quite a bit in Guernsey for a while, but it's never really taken off. So yes, I think that to speak to your point, that those would be really, really helpful to do that training to so-called train the public up, but also to understand the public's expectations of our behaviour as well, because I think it always helps to keep people in check.
Deputy Salisbury, would you
Yeah.
agree? What's the role of the voters in all this?
Well, I think there's two sides here. We've got deputies who I think should be calling out each other and saying this is bad behaviour. But from a public point of view, we see some of the toxicity on social media, Facebook, Twitter. Some people can get really excited. It's a strength, and I know it's really difficult to call those people out and say, look, we don't need this. We need respectful debate and make that the norm, the accepted way of doing things. I mean, we were saying we have got a brilliant system here, that consensus system of working together. And I think that what's happened in the rest of the world has actually affected people's thought process here, as if what they do in Westminster and all the noise around that, certainly since Brexit, has kind of filtered away here to the extent that well, we can behave like this is what people do. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to call it out, to stop people just bringing the level of debate down and actually talk about the issues.
Now, Perrin, you've been in to watch the States, haven't you?
I have.
What did you think?
Well, yes, it was interesting. I think I would like to come back to that.
Yeah. To everyone, by the way.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to that gentleman's question, because I thought it was interesting that you were suggesting that the public might be voting for the behaviours that are being exhibited. And as human beings, there's a wonderful quote in the beginning of a book called The Destiny of Man, I think, by Reinhold Niebuhr. And his first line of the book says, man is his own most vexing problem. And I genuinely think that's true. And I think we have an innate need to belong. And that need to belong often overrides common sense. And so I'm not saying that people do vote for poor behaviour. I'm not strictly saying that. But I do think we're attracted to groups where we can quickly gain a sense of belonging. But actually what happens is we're not belonging. We're actually just fitting in. And I think what we would like to try and do, and some of this would be obviously with the state's members, is look at ways of exhibiting behaviours that would then be replicated outwardly in the population, and vice versa. You know, you all put your hands up when you said, well, I don't steal from a hedge veg. Well, and I give way to people that are filter and turn. Those behaviours should be replicated within the states, and I think are on the whole. But I think it's easy to identify the negative and hold on to those. Mm-hmm. So I think we should be cautious about saying that it's all negative. I actually think there's an awful lot of positives. So you asked me a question about what I witnessed. I witnessed on the whole a keenness to try and debate an issue, but I also witnessed a significant lack in skills to do so. Mm. And I think that's what I would sum it up as.
Well,
that's fair comment.
Now, there was a lady who should have 2 hands up at this point. Where are you, lady with 2 hands up? Where are me? No, you're not here. Right, in that case, we'll go right to the back. We'll go to Carol at the back. Lady just in front of you.
I was really interested in what Jennifer had said about loneliness. It's Loneliness Awareness Week starting today, so that's very, very topical. But what we've found, certainly from the 2018 survey that you mentioned, and more recently we've done some more research which we haven't published yet, but that the loneliness is in a much younger age group than you might expect, and that sort of goes to Perrin's point about belonging as well. So perhaps the question to the politicians is, given that the Youth Parliament is poorly attended at the moment by politicians, how are you leading and creating a vision for youth to be engaged and feel as though they have a voice and belong in Guernsey and as part of the community and as part of future leaders of us?
We have many of the members of the youth states in the room with us, so they'll be very interested in this question. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah.
Heidi, you want to talk about youth states?
Yeah, I absolutely support Youth Parliament. I have been to it before. I think I was having appendectomy at the time of the latest Youth Parliament, so I have a bit of an excuse not to have attended that one. But we absolutely need to look for the future generation, not just for loneliness, but they are we should be thinking about future generations in all the debates that we have. But sadly, I don't think that happens. I think deputies more likely think, well, we know who are most likely to vote, so we'll think about them. And I think that is a real concern to me. We're not putting the next generation at the forefront of our minds and how we can deal with it. We've got one thing that I think, Millie, you've done as well, is the sixth form debates. I've done one every year, I think, since I was elected, which are fascinating. You really get to hear the absolute concerns. But also it's getting involved and talking about issues and debating them with pupils at those at various schools. And I think we should be doing more of that. Danielle, I'll name her here. Yes, she's over there. We had a fantastic debate at Ladies College recently talking about is sexism worse now than it was in the past? And I thought, oh, well, this is going to be an easy one to win this one. Of course it's better, all that legislation, absolutely everything. And Daniel ran away with it, but it was absolutely fantastic because it got students involved, and I know Mia is here and who did an absolutely fantastic job. So I think it's really supporting that, not just at the Youth Parliament, because that might be a bit challenging, but within schools. I think one thing I'd just pick up on is it's a campaign now, but I think it's really important that we do it, because it would be great for our future Parliament, and that's oracy. The whole talking about having confidence in speaking and putting your view across and being able to have respectful debate. And I know there's a campaign to improve and increase that in schools, particularly state schools, where that's not really ever been the thing. But that's something that I would like to take forward, is really help students in the sixth forms and younger to really help them and hone those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. The Youth Forum, the Youth Parliament actually is something that I have attended on a number of occasions, and obviously been to visit the Youth Forum as well when they're talking about these policy areas and doing some of their training. It actually has been in the States for a long time. My mum was in the States some years ago, and I think the pro-school education in schools was rolled out then. That was 15 years ago or so, Mum. And the former Deputy Michelle Leclerc used to do that programme as well. I'm not sure whether it's still going on, actually, and I'm looking at Carl here as SAC president, but the education in the States. And certainly we do have school trips coming to see what we're doing in action, and we are invited to the sixth form, and I've been into Blanchland to do politics sessions in Lamar Carteret, talk about politics, and they want to, the state schools definitely want to do more with us at a younger age. And I think it's really, really important. So it has been something where we've tried for many years as a body politic to encourage Guernsey youth to get involved, to get engaged, to have their say, to have their opinions listened to. And it's interesting, actually, Heidi talking about oracy. We were just talking about that today in one of our governance sessions around that within a primary school setting. So this is starting to be noted as something that is really important important for children not just to be creatively writing or just reading. It's about actually how do you have your say, how do you think about things and then talk about it and convey your feelings about different areas. It's really, really important, Carol. But just to talk to your point about loneliness, I was listening to when Jennifer was talking about the compassion in politics and reducing loneliness. But I think that we've got to be careful because loneliness has come about. I was listening to, I think, Digby Jones, it was talking at Christmas at some do, and he was talking about the difference between nowadays and when he was being brought up. And just thinking about how people live, how the lack of human connection that we have these days through the way that the houses are spread out, the way where the shops are, how we have a centralised, supermarket, the digitisation of life, so the sort of vehicular infrastructure, all of those things prevent us from seeing people on a more regular basis. So compassion in politics is one thing around the culture of how we engage with each other at a leadership level within the community, definitely, but there's also much more work around how we live as an environment, as a community.
Point, compassion isn't just for politics, but it's for communities. It's how, exactly your points, how we prioritise it.
But from just one moment, Heidi. Jennifer, can you tell us what compassion in politics is doing with young people?
What are we doing with young people? One of the things we're doing with young people is campaigning for lowering of the voting age to allow 16-year-olds to vote. Another thing that we're
a good case study for that one.
We're ahead of you.
Oh, you do?
We do, yes.
Already?
Yeah.
Great. You see, we've got so much to learn from you.
You did the Guernsification of the UK.
Very good. Sorry, Heidi, you wanted to come in.
No, it's fine.
No, it's fine. Great. Right.
I think it was what.
Sorry.
So what I was trying to say is, I think part of the problem is politics. Politicians, I see the big thing that we need to do. I mean, we talk about we need to build more houses. We need more housing, so that means lots and lots of building. But it doesn't. We need to look at the local level, that person level, and say, look, we've actually got lots of houses. We've got lots of houses where a lot of people are lonely. How can we use that and change that through trying to improve the housing situation? So it's more of a nuanced answers.
And there's a wider cultural point as well. The emphasis on common good and collective good has been slowly and systematically replaced by the individual being the point of safety. And so the things that bind us together have been less valued as opposed to the things that improve our own personal sense of status and safety. And we need to shift focus. We need to shift focus back to what collects us, what we have in common.
Lovely. Let's take another question now. On this side of the room, where are we? The lady in the middle with the spotty dress. I know who the lady in the middle is. I can see her now.
So do I.
Hi, it's Danielle Hufford-Fox. I'm the principal at the Ladies' College. I just wanted to talk a bit about debating and nuance, because we've talked about developing students' voices and having them say what they think. But the problem with that actually is that if we build that skill, I just think I'm going to yell, only you can hear me. If we build that skill, it's sort of a skill of just hardening opposition. I think this generation are very good at saying what they think. I think the problem is actually in finding the common ground and finding the nuance and the grey. And so I think I really love debating. I'm very passionate about it. But one very important part is they have to be willing. I've got some of my debaters down here. They have to be willing to debate either side with very little notice, right? They have to be willing to see both sides of the arguments. And I think that when we're talking about what we need to teach, we do need to teach oracy. I absolutely feel very strongly about that. And we need to teach the ability to be flexible in our thinking. But we also need to teach young people to really understand why they don't want to be flexible in our thinking. Because when we're talking about why people are voting for identity politics, why they're voting for the strongman leader, why they're voting for a party that makes them feel psychologically good, it's because they haven't really understood in themselves that drive. And so when we're looking at education, I think we need to start to dig into young people understanding the impact of echo chambers, the impact of that kind of psychology and thinking, so that they can deconstruct it and be better equipped for the future and for voting.
Brilliant. Do you have a question for the panel?
It was my idea, Shelaine, right? I was responding to their ideas.
I'd love to respond to that. I think it's such an important person. And Perrin, you touched on empathetic leadership just before you were cut off. And empathy is the crucial skill. It's not just being able to argue someone else's point of view. You know, as a former barrister, we have the cab rank rule. Doesn't matter who you represent, you're a gun for hire. But how can we feel into the position of those that are other than us? How can we row over to someone else's island? How can we understand their experience? Because that's actually what creates bridges rather than walls.
Brilliant.
Yeah, can I just
Yes, go on.
add to that? Look, I was, dare I say it, I was over in our neighbouring island the other week, and I was participating in a leadership event. And one of the questions that we were asked as a group was, you know, what do we need to do to inspire young people to step up and become the leaders of the future? And there was lots of debate around, you know, providing training and education and et cetera. And then gradually we kind of weaned everything down. And it comes to that lady, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, so
Danielle.
apologies, Danielle. It comes to your observation, and I think this is something that we really need to look at now, but also for our future leaders. And that is the translation of emotional intelligence into ethical intelligence. So what I mean by that is emotional intelligence is being able to, you know, see someone else, hear them, listen to them, understand them. Ethical intelligence goes one step further. It actually allows you to absorb and embrace their ideas and come to an ethical consensus decision inside yourself. Now that's an incredibly powerful skill to be able to have. And I think I just want to touch on one other thing before you'll go to the next question, but that's your role in a state's body and a role for anyone within any organization is as a custodian. You don't own it. You are not the end of it, and you were not the beginning of it. But you're a custodian. And those that are coming after you will have to pick up what you leave behind. And I think intergenerational understanding is again a skill that I think our current states, but I think leadership within organizations are already beginning to look at. What is the intergenerational consequence of the decision that I'm making right now? Thank you.
Can I ask if any of the young people in the room have any comments on what you've heard? Because effectively we're talking about young people and you're actually here with us. Do you agree with the panel? How do you feel about it? Imogen, Mia? Mia, do you want to say something? And wait, if anybody else wants to say anything, stick your hand up and I'll come to you next.
I was on the...
I'll give your name first.
Oh, hello everyone. My name is Mia Edgeworth, and I'm a Year 12 pupil at Ladies College. I was on the previous previous youth forum. I was the chair, and we did the youth states. And what I was debating, what I was giving the lead speech on, was inclusion. And we had many states members come to watch us, but I think what the whole idea of this event, of it doesn't have to be this way, is largely the fact that states members need to feel included within the states. And I think that if the members listen to us, listen to the young people, they would realise that that is what it is, because we showed at the youth states that that is what we feel is the most important thing to us. So what can we do to encourage states members to really engage and listen to the youth voice?
I'd say just tell them how important your vote is. You've got an equal vote as anybody else who's puts their name on the electoral roll. And I think one thing I want to do between now and the next election is get as many young people on that register and voting. Because if you don't vote, your views are not heard, and then the states won't think about how important you are. And I think that has been a real problem over recent years. I think, and it's something we absolutely need to address for the future of Guernsey. It's not just the future of Guernsey; it's the future of its people, and that's what needs to be at the forefront of our mind.
Imogen, go on. Sorry.
Imogen Bacon. I'm in year 10 at the Ladies' College. I think the point Mia made about not only getting the youth involved, but also getting deputies to then engage with the youth once they are involved. So, for example, obviously Mia spoke about the youth states debate, but there was, each youth forum has a term where they have a debate, and there's a debate that happened after that in September of last year. And I checked before this event, that's still not even up on the state's website. They have a list of all the debates they've had, and the debate, their last recorded debate for the youth state isn't our debate. It's a debate from a few years ago. We're not even there on the register. I mean, I wrote an article in the press about the fact that hardly any deputies showed up. But I think, obviously I understand, like you mentioned, you had a medical issue. So it's fine.
I can show you the scar if you like.
But I think it's making sure that if we have these youth programmes to get the youth involved, that the deputies do show up and that the youth feel that they've put a lot of effort in to these projects and that the deputies are listening and really trying to help make that change. And I think
you've got several deputies in front of you. When is the next youth state?
We've not decided yet.
Don't you have something on the 24th and 25th? Go on, back. We were going to come to the back. Let's give a microphone to our back row. When is your next youth state? Oh, they're in the middle, right. Can we have a microphone to the middle, please?
May I just say, while the microphone's going back, is that actually I know that there was a lot of work put in by deputies who came down to see the Youth Forum members, wasn't there? Because you had a debate on marijuana and the legalisation of marijuana. And it was an amazing debate because it was like watching a flow in the water because the presiding officer allowed people more than one go to talk. And it was fascinating how the argument went backwards and forwards. And I know that John and Carl were there, and those of us that were there thought it was brilliant, absolutely amazing debate. And I do know that colleagues who weren't able to be there, some of them did come down and spend a long time with members who debated the day before. And I do know that if the more opportunities were provided for deputies to spend time with the Youth Forum and throughout schools, it would be happening, that we'd all jump at the chance to do it. It's just about getting on and facilitating it, really.
But we can, I mean, we're happy to do things if people ask, so they're interested in politics. I mean, Mia knows a few of us went round the Royal Court building a few weeks ago, and really, I think, hopefully it was really helpful just seeing where we debate and going through the order paper and getting a feel of what it means there. And I think we're very happy to do that. I'm sure other deputies are as well.
Brilliant. Now, do you have something to say? Go on.
Hello, I'm Eva Rollinghase. I'm also at Ladies. And kind of jumping back a bit to the calling out the bad behaviour, I know that quite a lot of young people get quite disengaged with politics because when you open your BBC News app, you'll know that you'll see another political scandal as opposed to political change. So what I wanted to talk about was how do we get, we've talked quite a lot about like reforming code of conduct and making sure people meet ethical standards. But how do we get politicians to make sure they themselves meet those ethical standards? Because intrinsic motivation is so much more powerful than getting external people to try and regulate and get the voters to try and call out people. So how do we get people themselves to make the right choice? Because that would be so much more powerful.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that it is a cultural issue within the states, and to empower people. And again, it goes back to the mentoring, having those who've been before, who understand how the political system works, understand what good looks like, and to have proper training that is of value. And repeat training, leadership training is really important. Leadership training on its own. It's interesting because our officers within the civil service used to be offered leadership training, but actually within the states, if we applied for it, we'd have to pay for it ourselves out of our own pockets. And so, you know, not all politicians are filthy rich, so you know it is a difficult decision to make around extra training. I paid a considerable sum of money to go through IOD for company director, which was the only course that I felt in terms of governance that was equivalent to what I needed, because I did think that I wanted to have a presidency job this particular term, and I'm really pleased that I did. But it was, you know, nearly £10,000, and that's a huge amount out of your personal budget to pay. But it's been really worthwhile. But then other people will say, well, they wouldn't dream of being able to they just wouldn't be able to pay that. So we're disadvantaging people. And I think that we do, because we don't have a budget. But then, money's really tight at the moment. So we've got these really difficult decisions to make about, is it better to pay for training for politicians, or do we want to pay towards another MRI scanner? Those are the very difficult and real decisions that we have to make. And I'm afraid that political budget for training gets squeezed, as all training budgets do, but then it makes for a worse quality politician if we're not able to allow them to develop themselves.
Yeah, the question was about bad behaviour. And I would hope that people understood what bad behaviour was. They wouldn't need training to understand. It's not great shouting at somebody in a room. It's not great having a mass walkout. It's not great doing other things to deputies to humiliate them. So for me, I think a big thing that we need to do is peer pressure, and talking to each other and taking somebody aside and saying, that's not the way to do it. Well, how can we work around this and actually try and positively change people? Well, there are some of us who do that, who go off and say to people, you didn't need to do that. What about doing things like this? Or, we can't have this standoff. We've got to start working together. Hopefully that builds, but also what you're doing here today, everybody here having this session that's been put on, it says, it's not just some of those deputies in the States trying to improve things. This is what people really think is important. And I think that peer pressure, that the community saying you need to do it, we can get a groundswell of opinion. That's exactly what you're trying to do in the UK, Jennifer.
And there are a couple of ideas that I just wanted to float while we're dreaming about what we could do. One of them is that deputies actually meet the people who elect them on a regular basis. We're looking at constituency assemblies. How often do you meet your constituents? How often do you tell them what you're doing? How much of a through flow of information is there? And also a youth question time in Parliament. Why not dedicate a set period of time to invite young people in to ask questions of their representatives?
That's really good point, because it's exactly what we did during the pandemic. We realised, it's not just the adults who are going through this. Get the children needed to have questions answered, and doing that, I think it helped them. It was quite a worrying time for a lot of kids, and how it was impacting their family. I think you're absolutely right, and I think what we've lacked from island-wide voting is that step away from our constituents, our parishes, that we've lost that sense of identity as belonging to a district, and at the more that smaller level, being able to feel closer and that belonging, I felt very much. I was a South East District Deputy, and I felt a belonging to that area, and I knew people knew that I would support and help people within that district. And I think we've lost that with island-wide voting. I think deputies are less close to the people than they were, and also didn't see what was happening to people, what the lives that people were living, knocking on doors, because it's all too big, we can't knock on doors. And actually, it's such an important time. I know something former Deputy Leclerc believes passionately in, that you would be surprised what you saw when you knocked on those doors, and people opened their doors, and you saw what was behind there. And getting that compassion, understanding what people were living is so important, and I think it's something we've lost.
Deputy, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, thank you. I did, because I think that it was an interesting point that Heidi made around, well, you don't need training to understand that shouting at someone isn't good behaviour and the other things. But actually, I think that you need to set the tone. You need to set the expectation of what working in a team looks like. Because we've lost, unfortunately, I'm sorry, Carl, I'm not an island-wide voting fan at all. I absolutely resonate with what Heidi said. I absolutely loved being a Western Parishes deputy and being that connected feeling that you get knocking on the doors. But actually, with that, we're losing the link with the douzaine, and the douzaine allowed people a way to come through into politics, where they sat around a table, they understood what it meant to be on a committee, they started to really understand how Guernsey politics works. And we've had some people in this intake who did a behind the keyboard campaign. They didn't get out and about at all. And they had never been part of a team before, within a corporate environment even, or let alone a design. And there hasn't been that ability to enable people to understand what being part of a team looks like, how to start off on a good foot. And that isn't just a one-off training through an induction for the first 6 months, because you then get thrown into committee work and it's hard. The expectation for my committee for education, sport and culture is, you know, weekly packs of hundreds of pages of really quite technical content for individuals to read that, to be able to absorb it to the best of their ability. And obviously we've got very capable advisors to be able to talk around these subjects in addition to their parliamentarian work. If you're on two committees, one of my committee members is on Home Affairs, which is an equally technical committee, the amount of reading there is mammoth. So there does need to be a greater amount of understanding of what the states do, that joining the states as someone who just comes in off the street with no real understanding of what legislation means or public policy formulation means is really, really hard, very challenging. And unless we support people, they will ultimately fall foul. And passions will run high, and they won't have the skills to be able to separate their emotions from the professionalism that they need to display.
And a quick plug for the politics group at this point, because that's exactly what we do. We get around the table and talk about policy issues. It doesn't matter if you want to become a deputy or not, but obviously it is really good to be able to start learning about issues. We do briefing sheets, all the rest of it. So if you wanted to start to get a feel for the way policy works, then politics group is for you. Now, I think we've got a big question up the top here. Is this the one you meant, Linda? Yeah, go on then, Lindsay.
Lindsay DeSorry, so I'm a politician. And I've got an idea and a question, if that's okay.
Brilliant.
So I don't know if this is going to just depress anyone more, but there's been a lot of focus on behaviours in states meetings. In my experience, people are on their best behaviour in states meetings. I think the problems are usually in non-states meetings where it's far more problematic. And I'd just like to do a little bit of a shout out for a fantastic team that is in the house tonight, which is they're the parliamentary team. They're sitting down there and they do the most phenomenal work. And they've come out en masse tonight. This question of sort of behaviours has been kicking around. It's one that I've been quite involved in for a bit, and I've long been of the view that the code of conduct is not fit for that purpose, because I think that is a good tool for members of the public to hold deputies to account. But as soon as you are talking about politicians holding each other to account, I think it's not the right tool, and I think it's even more problematic when you're talking about the civil service. So one of the things that I know the parliamentary team have been looking at is a code of behaviour, and I'd be interested in Jennifer's view, because I know that they have something similar in the UK, and I'd love to learn what we can from your perspective, if that's okay. So it's certainly not a silver bullet, but it is maybe something that would help. And my question is, going back to the issue that we were talking about a bit earlier, where it would be wonderful if honesty and integrity were rewarded, but often it feels as though the reverse is true. And so I'm interested, my professional background is in media, including in the news media, and I'm particularly interested in the role that the media has to play, because I think there is much more salience in the negativity than there is in the positive stuff. I was in a meeting, a public sort of forum the other day, and someone said, "Oh, why don't you talk to Jersey and talk to all these people and work with them?" And I said, "Well, we do." And she said, "Well, why didn't you say anything about it?" And I said, "Well, I do." And she said, "Well, why don't I know about it?" And I think that comes to the point that actually that's just not, that's not the way that the media often works, is it doesn't sell as much news to report on the stuff where everyone's working nicely together. So I'd be very interested to hear views on how we can maybe get a bit more salience on some of the positive stuff as well.
Okay, that's a good one. You wanted to talk to Jennifer about that first, didn't you? Jennifer, you go first.
I would I would just confirm that the idea of a code of behaviour is a really, really good idea. And just flipping back to what you were saying about training, we actually go into the Palace of Westminster and do training. And part of the training we do is about how we take care of ourselves in a stressful situation. Because a lot of the behaviours that we're talking about are responses to stress or to conflict or to an adversarial setting. And when we understand the mechanisms that are happening within us and how to retain centered when all around us is madness, that can have a huge impact. And as a former journalist, I completely concur with you about the symbiotic relationship between the media and politics, and the media feeds off political conflict. And because the politicians naturally seek the media as a way of communicating, they know what the media want, and they want snappy sound bites. They want things that appear simplistic, punchy, pithy. You know, we have a Punch and Judy politics in the UK, and we have Punch and Judy media coverage. So it's how do we change the show? And there are some new examples emerging, you know, as all of us become citizens and journalists, and there's a plethora of where we can get information from. How reliable it is another question. You know, there is a demand for storytelling of a different kind that is based on values and narratives that we want to hear. You know, if you think of the stories and myths that we as a culture and a society are raised on, they're stories with resolution. And we're lacking those in our culture at the moment. So I think you're absolutely right to identify that. And I am hopeful that that new form of storytelling is ripe and starting to emerge.
Better something, media?
Yeah, no, yes, of course, the media always want that thing that will sell their stories so that they can sell their paper or get people to click on there and get the adverts paying for them. But I can see why they do it, but it's not necessary. I think people have had enough of it, quite frankly, that constant negativity of every single headline. I mean, I'm a glass half full person, not half empty, and I always think things can be better, and people want to see things getting better and people trying to make things better. I think something the other day, I mean, I'd done a letter saying, you know, please, you know, we need to work together to reach a solution, but the headline wasn't. It was sort of like, you know, do this or go, and it really wasn't the whole essence of that letter, and it got me because I thought, well, that doesn't help what I was trying to say, because there are some of us who really want to start getting people working together. I think the behaviour idea, the having a code of behaviour, absolutely fantastic, because then you've got something to point to. It's very difficult saying something which we, as Lindsay will well know, a situation where behaviour was unacceptable. Or you could say to yourself, well, do you really need to behave like that? Instead of saying, actually, there's a code of behaviour and you're breaking it. Do not do it. And that peer pressure should stop, because you've got something to follow in a way that it's very difficult. You can look like, well, you're a bit holier than thou, aren't you? Instead of saying, no, this is what the behaviour that we expect from our elected representatives, and you're one of them, and it's really important that you do it.
And also the ability to name behaviours, because often something happens and we can't even articulate what it is that's happened.
They were a bit stared at somebody and they were shouty. It's really hard to say why that's not right.
So we almost need the language.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Did you want to say?
Yeah, I did, about the media, because I think that the media are extremely negative in Guernsey, and it's really irresponsible on occasion. The type of reporting that we get that just brings the island down, I think it does nothing for our reputation. I think it does nothing for our well-being and our positivity as an island that actually has been hugely successful decade upon decade. And I think sometimes our own behaviour isn't helpful either. I think that politicians have a tendency sometimes to speak to each other through the media. I never understand that. I've got a telephone. Let's speak, or I'll see you tomorrow. So why did that have to go into the newspaper before I even knew about it? You know, that's a personal issue. But I think that it is really unhelpful the way that the media tries to polarise behaviours and also relationships within the states, because it's not reflective of the true states. The code of behaviour is an interesting concept, and I think that the events like this, I hope, allow us to describe that the states actually. I personally have a different view from Heidi because we've got different experiences within the states. I don't think it's as bad, and I really hope that people don't feel that there's this horrible, toxic, manipulative, poisonous atmosphere, because there really isn't. And Perrin, you've come in and seen us in action in the States. And I think that the discrimination legislation debate, which was quite contentious, actually everyone behaved really, really well through that. I think there was a lot of collegiate cooperative working. There was a lot of, there was conversation on both sides where people were really challenging and questioning. And I think that everyone behaved really well. And there's some really difficult topics that we have to debate within the states. The abortion legislation, assisted dying. I mean, these are not light topics. They're topics that people take really, really seriously, that we know affect people's everyday lives. And everyone does their best. I think that sometimes behaviour traits are... We don't understand what side of bed someone wakes up in the morning always. We don't step back from ourselves and think, why did that person react so angrily? Why were they so impassioned? Certainly sex-based personality traits, and Perrin, we were talking about this earlier about your sort of academic background and how you bring that professionality to it. This is a really complex area about why people react like they do. Men in general, not all men obviously, they tend to be maybe more assertive, maybe more aggressive in their demeanour when making discussions. Women, I understand, tend to be more agreeable. We're more conflict resolution. We don't generally want to have a bit of a verbal punch-up. Don't get so excited by a big row. And those are the differences within our chamber. We've got a majority of men, a minority of women. If that was swung the other way, what would...
Here.
Absolutely. What would how would... Absolutely. So how would the men feel? So I think that all of those dynamics need to be taken into consideration about how you smooth those rough edges. And I have to go back, I'm afraid, again, to training and to showing people what the expectation of behaviour is going to be. PRISM, I think, is also a great thing, but I'm a bit outvoted on that.
PRISM, not PRISM.
No, PRISM, about how you map your personality traits. And I think that those sort of things would be great, but maybe that's a little bit of a gimmick. I don't know. I think that organisations use these things to great effect, and maybe we can learn from it.
I think code of behaviour is a really good thing to
okay.
end on. But before we end, would the media like a right of reply?
Yeah.
Laura.
Thank you very much. My name's Laura Clayton. I'm a senior reporter now at Bailiwick Express, but until a little while ago, I was news editor at Bailiwick Express, formerly news editor at Ireland FM, formerly a reporter at BBC Guernsey, and I've worked in the UK as well. So I'm quite experienced. I've got nearly 30 years experience working within the local media. One thing I would say is if I wanted to contact Deputy Soulsby or Deputy Dudley Owen or indeed Deputy de Sommeray, I would be able to contact them and I would expect a reply. A majority of our States members now, or if I've got a question about anything that comes under the huge umbrella of the States of Guernsey, which today covered the Delancey Park playground, we have to go through the comms team at the States of Guernsey. And I see James Fuller is sitting a few rows in front of me, and he was the first comms official, I think, for the States of Guernsey some time ago. But there's now a huge team of people, and sometimes it's difficult for the media to get a direct comment from an elected official. And I think sometimes those messages are then lost in statements that come back from the comms team to the media, just attributed to a spokesperson for environment and infrastructure. You know, a faceless spokesperson. We don't know who that is, but that's all we have to go on. So when we're told that it's negative storytelling, sometimes we can only work on the information we're getting, and we're not even getting it from the person that we've asked the question of.
Let me ask the panel what they think we should do about that.
Well, I think that to your point, Laura, I would always prefer to give you a response myself, and the reason that I would prefer you to go for the comms team with the role that I'm currently undertaking as president is to be able to come through and be able to manage that, so you do get an actual response, because my time, I'm really pressed in terms of what I've got to engage with. So that ensures you get a response if you go that way. However, I've always been very open with the media and always been very receptive, but it makes me less receptive when the headline, as Heidi said, does not reflect the story. And I've seen that more and more recently, actually. In my first term, I didn't see that. More and more recently. And I've noticed that people on social media, when they're commenting on these stories, are saying, well, wait a minute. That headline, now I've read the story, does not reflect what the narrative actually is, what the content is. But I do think that it's incumbent on the media as well to ensure that, A, there's accuracy in the reporting, because I notice that sometimes there isn't accuracy, and B, that the headlines are not too inflammatory. We've all got to get on. We're a small community. We're related to a lot of people. We work with a lot of people. When members come out of the states and become non-deputies, we've got a life to lead as well. And certainly some of the opinion writers, I think I've been at the sharp end of the pen from opinion writers on many of occasions. I don't want people to think that I'm the same person that pen is painting the picture of, because I'm really not. And it can be really quite unpleasant commentary at the behest of those opinion writers. So it's not just the journalism, which, on the whole is professional, but on occasions you do pick up these negative vibes. But I think that the opinion writers, when they get their facts wrong, base their opinion on incorrect facts, and then start to attack the personality, can really do a lot of damage.
It sounds like we could do an entire session just on
Yeah.
media.
Yeah.
And it sounds like we need a bit of arbitration going on. Do you have something briefly to say, Heidi, before we close?
Yeah, and I think I agree with Laura how some deputies have hidden away and not expressed their opinion. I do think, although I get questions some of the social media, I do think it's invaluable for politicians to actually get messages across. It makes it can personal, not in the bad way. It's not in a bad way, but you actually can say and put things across without that filter. I think we saw that in the pandemic, particularly where certainly in the first lockdown, where we were absolutely going out there directly to members of the public and dealing with their concerns there. And then I think those that are in those positions of influence, and as presidents especially, have an opportunity there that they're not taking. Some of them, not all of them, because I know that particularly I know Lindsay and on Twitter does, that aren't really. It can be a force for good and not just that force for bad that some people just don't want to just work with, because it's all about that direct communication, and people hear from you directly, actually understand you more, and then they say, oh, you're not this person in the background who we don't know what they're up to. You can actually get your message across directly. So you can moan about what the media are putting out, but you do actually have a voice yourself, and you can use the media to get your voice across as well.
Your voice yourself, voice of the voter, is a good place to finish this evening. I'd like you all to thank our panel most gratefully for all of their insights. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to you, our lovely audience. You've been amazing this evening. We've had a really good debate, which is exactly what we wanted to happen. Obviously, an event like this doesn't come together by itself. I'd like to thank the wonderful Linda Rolfe, who's up in the gods and has been putting all the notices up for everything she's done. And also all the rest of the Women in Public Life Committee who have really put their backs into organising all of this. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to the wonderful volunteers who greeted you when you first came in, many of whom are members of the politics group. Thank you to Russ, who does all the technology up the top there. To Ollie. Thank you to JML Compliance, who have sponsored the video of this whole event, which you'll be able to see on our website a bit later tomorrow. And there was one more. Yes. Thank you to Paul for the photos. There's a particularly beautiful photo. He's taken photos of all of us now. There's a particularly beautiful photo of you, Jennifer, that he took earlier today that was up on screen. And we'll make sure you get a copy of that. That's brilliant. Okay, I'd like to leave you with just a thought, and it's based on the current Sunday Times bestseller. If you've been sitting in the audience thinking, but what can I do? There's so much you could do. Come and watch a states meeting for a start. We'd love to take you. We'd love to be there with you and organise that with you. You can, I don't know, what can you do? You can get involved in a consultation. You could go to a drop-in. You could encourage someone who's really brilliant and fantastic to stand for election. You could stand for election. But more than anything, with all the ideas that we've generated this evening, they are not going to do themselves. They will do themselves, they will be done because people like you, people like Women in Public Life who got together as a group of volunteers, people like you can get together and take these ideas forward too. If we want a code of behaviour, it's going to be a lot easier to get that through the states if the public is pushing for it. It doesn't have to be this way. Good night.